It's been half a century since Rosa Parks made her stand by refusing to give up her seat. She is still remembered and relevant today.
It began a whole flood of activity that ended with the Civil Rights Act. It began with her saying, no, I'm not going to move from my seat.
She's been credited as being the mother of the Civil Rights Movement.
She started a movement that is very, very crucial. She gave other people courage to come in, to buy into the idea, and to also back her and start saying, no, we will not go to the back of the bus.
She was the spark, I think, to a lot of young folks who were in college at that time.
We have to teach the history to all people, but it's important that we know that Mrs. Rosa Parks' impacted all of us, all Americans.
She made a change for all of us, black and white. We all have changed, and it's a beautiful thing. And it came through our school system, on through the economy, and in our real relationship with people in the city now. You can feel it all over the city. You can feel it.
Rosa Parks was a Montgomery, Alabama seamstress. She and husband Raymond Parks were members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. On December 1st, 1955, she defied a bus driver's demand to give up her seat to make room for white passengers. She was arrested and fined $14. The incident led to the Montgomery bus boycott, led by local pastor Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The boycott lasted 382 days, and eventually the United States Supreme Court struck down the Montgomery ordinance, under which Parks had been fined, and outlawed racial segregation on public transportation. By then, the boycott had invigorated the civil rights movement nationwide. On November 30th, 2008, the eve of the 53rd anniversary of the day Parks said no, the Rosa Parks Quiet Courage Committee came together to honor those in the community who found their own courage to become civil rights leaders, and to rename the City of Gainesville Downtown Regional Transit Bus Depot in Rosa Parks' honor, beginning with a joyful and symbolic freedom ride to the bus station.
Well, riding the bus today is significant because we know back during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, marches were held, riding bus was important because Mrs. Parks, of course, refused to give up her seat on the bus when she was very tired of having worked all day. So we wanted to bring the community back to the site where people can now ride the bus and sit any place they want to.
Everybody was so excited today as we kept yelling out the word freedom. Freedom, that word freedom coming from our hearts, so significant. Singing the freedom songs, following the movement, honoring the people that have fought for our civil rights. And the diversity is just so awesome. The diversity that we had today, the diversity in the civil rights workers, like Dr. Harmeling.
I just think the bringing together of the community to recognize on this day Rosa Parks and to name our bus terminal the Rosa Parks Bus Terminal reminds us of the theme of today, which is the Rosa Parks Quiet Courage Award.
The goal of the Quiet Courage Committee is to bring attention to those workers who very quietly made a difference during the civil rights era. We know a lot of strides were made, but we don't know who did the scut work, who were in the trenches, and it's our duty to try to find those people and have their story told so that history becomes really history the way it should be.
I'm not from Florida. I didn't come here until '76, but I'm always deeply touched about how the people here went through so much aggravation and so much hostility, but still were able to tell their stories, even more so for young people who need to know what happened here long before they were even born. So it's very important to give them a chance to tell their stories.
So what is our civil rights story? What was it like to live in Alachua County 53 years ago?
Just like any other city in the South, we too had to actually take a stand here back in the cities to make sure that, we boycotted, we integrated schools, we did some of the similar things that other cities in the South did as well.
Civil rights activist and former county commissioner and school board member Charles Chestnut III remembers Alachua County in the 1950s.
It was totally, purely segregated. I saw the separate water fountains, colored water fountains, white water. I saw the indignities of, as I said, shopping and spending your money in a store, and you could not go to the lunch counter and get a drink or a sandwich. I saw my grandmother go to Wilson's department store to buy some clothes. She couldn't try them on. She couldn't try a hat on. She couldn't try the clothes on. Being on one side of town, around 6 o'clock, you better be on your side of town. And it was just those indignities that you accepted as a way of life because that was the way that you were brought up, and that was the way the conditions were at that time.
J. Leslie Cosby was the first black teacher at Gainesville High School. For her, segregation was harsh reality, a reality from which she tried to shield her children.
When my children were coming up, I went in Woolworths, but I only went in a certain door. Not that I couldn't go in all the doors, but one door there right past the lunch counter, and I wasn't going to have my children upset. They didn't know there was a lunch counter in the store. No blacks were allowed to eat. I mean, my children were pre-desegregation.
More than just stores and restaurants were segregated, all life was segregated. Homes, businesses, schools, opportunities. Separate, but not equal.
The neighborhoods were very segregated. Most of the African Americans lived in the neighborhood that I was born in. And we went to a segregated school. Lincoln High School it was at that time. But it was very, very segregated. And so we were not allowed to attend the schools on the other side of town, the schools that had the better teachers, the better books, the better equipment. But we did have teachers who cared and very, very knowledgeable, who helped us get over the hurdle.
Andrew Mickle was one of those teachers. Today, he remembers with pride his time as a Lincoln High School teacher and swim coach for African American children during segregation.
I came here in 1955 as a teacher, but I could swim. This was before integration. The Lincoln Pool had a history of developing good swimmers. We had a championship swimming team there under the Orange State Recreation Association, which was partly supported by Gainesville Recreation Association because we were the only swimmers.
I'm really grateful for those teachers, for the hard work. Another civil rights movement, people working hard, a lot of courage.
And some of that courage was instilled in local students, emboldened by Rosa Parks' example. Chestnut was youth council president of the local chapter of the NAACP at the time.
It was North Carolina A&T, when the students, sat in up there and started dealing with things that we realized that, hey, we can do the same thing down here. And about 3 or 4 of us started doing it. Uptown, at Canova's drugstore, Woolworth, all those little stores that were uptown that blacks could not. And that just kind of started a revolution here. Well, I have to give some credit to the police department because this was new to them. They didn't know how to handle this situation. It was just new. But it was mostly picketing. We would go in, we would be put out, we would be threatened that they would call the police, and at that point, the last threat, then we would leave, and be outside when the police came, so there was nothing that they could do to us. I went to the College Inn, which was off the campus of the University of Florida. Based upon my complexion, they didn't know whether I was a foreign student or not. Then I had another young man to come in who was of darker complexion. They refused to serve him, but had served me. And then I asked them, why didn't you serve, why didn't serve him? They said, we don't serve Negroes in here. And I said, well, I'm a Negro. And then they called the police, So those were the kinds of things that we were basically going through, was being turned away from businesses who would accept our money on one hand, but not give us the public accommodation consideration on the other hand.
And the movement wasn't restricted to blacks. Dan Harmeling and his twin brother Jim were student activists at the University of Florida.
I began as a 21-year-old student in his junior year at the University of Florida, and when the NAACP started picking picketing the downtown movie theater. It was written about in the newspaper, and I felt drawn to the civil rights movement. I had given much thought about it in the past, but was not an activist. So at that time, I decided to find out where the NAACP meeting was, and that very night I went to my meeting, and it changed my life. I could put into action the kinds of things that I was raised to believe in, and now we could actually act on those beliefs.
Dan and Jim Harmeling weren't alone in feeling motivated. Students were staging protests and sit-ins across the state and the nation. The Harmeling brothers and other UF activists were often involved, often facing academic and legal repercussions.
We connected with other groups in other cities, and we also found ourselves going to demonstrations in St. Augustine, in Tallahassee, in Jacksonville, Ocala, and also had students going to the Montgomery Selma March. I was quite an activist. My brother was an activist, but he was also a leader. He served as vice president of the Alachua County NAACP, and he also served as a president of the Student Group for Equal Rights, and he also ran for president of the Freedom Party at the University of Florida. The first integrated party and the first time that black students ran for political office. He didn't win, but he had a platform that set apart all the progressive things that students and the university should be a part of. The early efforts of students and faculty at the University of Florida were met with recriminations by the university administration. It was a struggle for us academically, not because we didn't have high grade point averages, but they suspended us from classes because of our activities.
Meanwhile, the Alachua County NAACP was making progress as tensions began to rise.
One Sunday, 3 guys went down to the Florida Theater to go in the movie. And Sunday in this town at that time was where everybody who had cars, you rode around on Sunday with your children in the car, just a Sunday afternoon ride. And fortunately enough, there were enough black folks who had cars who saw white folks gathering around all the black folks who were standing in front of the Florida Theater. And they came back down to the black community and told them what was going on. And about 250 people started marching toward town. The police department didn't know what the hell to do. You see what I'm saying? And that's what they kind of really considered to be the first race riot. And that was when Byron Wynn stepped in, who was the mayor of Gainesville at that time, who formed the biracial committee to get the old timers of the town to sit down with black folks of the town and begin to talk about some things.
But it was the picketing and good business sense which began to change minds.
And we kept pushing. It was a hotel motel restaurant association who came forward, and one of the gentlemen that I respect highly was a gentleman named Nat Posen, who ran what they used to call, in fact, he and his brother built the University Inn on 13th Street. And they got together first and decided that this was not good for business, because we were picketing and people were coming into their businesses, but they weren't buying anything. They were just sitting there drinking tea and coffee, looking out the windows, us picketing. So they weren't selling the meals that they normally sold at lunchtime and those kinds of things, that they say, hey, well, this ain't working. This ain't helping here. Hey, this is hurting our business. Hotel, motel, restaurant association was the first ones to say, hey, yeah, we'll take black folks. But it was the McCrory's and it was the Woolworths and it was those kinds of little fast food places, the Humpty Dumpty and those kind of places that began to feel the impact.
While integration in public accommodations began to take hold, it would take more time to integrate public schools. As Governor George Wallace of Alabama blocked the path of black students at the University of Alabama, Reverend Thomas A. Wright of Mount Carmel Baptist Church and the Alachua County chapter of the NAACP was preparing to challenge local school segregation in the courts. 3 students would leave all-black Lincoln High School to desegregate white Gainesville High School: Wright's daughter LaVon, Sandra Williams, and Joelle Buchanan. The year was 1964.
Being a member of the NAACP branch, youth branch, I volunteered to say I'll be willing to do it. We had to have the consent of our parents. I did not know what I was doing beyond simply saying that I would go over to Gainesville High School. Gainesville High School was probably 3 to 4 blocks from my home. Lincoln High School was across town. He filed a suit. They chose not to pursue the suit, the school board, and so they decided they would integrate without going through the suit.
The seriousness of the commitment he had made was not immediately evident to the young Buchanan.
All I thought I was doing was just going from one school to another school. And it did not hit the Gainesville Sun paper until the day of the school. And the reason for that is, after the 3 of us was decided that we would be the one going, we had a meeting with the chief of police to discuss our safety because they thought we could be hurt and or killed. The moment I got on campus, from that day, and I finished school in '66, this was in '64, from that day to this day, my life changed. I never ever, and this is an honest statement, I knew I was different, but I never knew what people thought of people of color because that never came to my ears. In my history that I've written, I put 3 words that describe that period: quiet, shocking, and piercing. That period at Gainesville High School, the entire time I was there, 99.9, nobody said anything to me at all during the day. Quiet period. 2, I was not allowed to go back to Lincoln High School because there I had become a traitor because I left Lincoln High School, so I couldn't go there. It was, I said, shocking because I did not know until I heard and saw that people literally hated Negroes. I saw hate that I never saw again. And I had started the process, so I couldn't stop. So my goal was to graduate.
The year after Buchanan, Wright, and Williams integrated Gainesville High School as students, J. Leslie Cosby integrated the school as a teacher.
I was the first African-American teacher at Gainesville High School, and I was the only one for 3 years. I was scared to death. I didn't want to go. I had been teaching 2nd grade, and back then, little children were sweet little darlings. They came to school every morning wanting to kiss the teacher and hug the teacher and sit in the teacher's lap or chair.
The school made plans to ensure the experiment would be a success.
When I got there, they had prepared for me. They decided that no student could switch math classes unless it was an administrative error. Now this went on for 3 years. They were afraid that when my students looked at me, everybody would be down to the counselor's office wanting to transfer out of my class. And that was the reason for that.
Students stayed in Cosby's class and learned. There never were any transfers, and the school also made sure she felt safe.
When I left my room, they made arrangements for someone to walk down the hall with me. So I was never in fear like the students had been the previous year when they first went there.
There was violence and verbal and physical intimidation for the students that first year. Reverend Wright's daughter, LaVon, in particular, was a target.
She had a very difficult time. She was beaten severely at the school that year.
She apparently was injured and beaten, and unfortunate incident. But she is such an awesome human being. She's gotten her PhD, just very, very knowledgeable, and has taught so many others a lesson. If you got it in your mind, and you're intelligent, and you're willing to fight, you can succeed.
All 3 students would graduate from Gainesville High School and go on to college. And school desegregation would succeed in Alachua County as well. The Supreme Court ordered full integration of county schools in 1970. Buchanan was among the first black students to attend and graduate from the University of Florida. And Andrew Mickle's son Stephen was the first African American to receive an undergraduate degree from UF. Today, he is a federal judge. All of Mickle's sons have gone on to college, a fact that evokes in him both pride in his children and in his community.
It's a pleasure to know that your children or your offspring have had that kind of opportunity given them by people like we have in Gainesville, University of Florida, and the public school system.
Opportunities that were not available when Mickle was a young man. In 1989, the city of Gainesville named a municipal pool in his honor, an accolade very unlikely before the civil rights movement. But while much has changed, there is still much work to be done to change ideas, minds, and hearts in people of all races, to build upon the legacy of Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement.
They paved the way. If it had not been for them, then this would not have taken place today. We would not be here. So because they came before us, we have to honor them and pay respect to them because of what they did so many years ago.
Events like this promote the idea that so much has happened in the past that's positive.
I've seen changes that we have a right to be proud of because we all changed.
Back when Rosa Parks, when she went through the ordeal that she went through, not being able to simply sit on the bus where she wanted to, and when she spoke up, that courage is carried forward to LaVon Wright, to Joel Buchanan, to many others, and that courage even has come forward today to the point that we now have an African American president. So times are changing, many, many changes that I'm thankful and just grateful to be alive to see. A lot of people are saying, I didn't think I would see it. But for me, I never gave up hope and I never gave up faith, and I believed that I would see this in my lifetime.
I think we'll become more tolerant. I think many of the policies that the cities and the counties and the state and other institutions have that are anti-discrimination policies have certainly helped. And the other thing is time has just changed, and you have people now who are generations of children who have no idea of what segregation was, and they were born in integration, during the period of integration, so that has certainly helped as well.
We've still got a long road to hoe. And Obama is going to be a good president, but he is not going to be the answer to the African American problems. We've got to take care of that ourselves. We got a shining star now, so we've got to strive to be a shining star. As Martin Luther King said, judge me not by the color of my skin, but the content of my character. That feeling is beginning to set into America. I think that's the bridge that we have crossed. And now it is to say that can we continue that movement toward that of making America just one country. You take me on the merits, not the color of my skin, but the content of my character. And I either prove it to you or I don't prove it to you. That's a good country. That's a good country.